Hello and welcome to our Finance Minister Special. Today we focus on Tamil Nadu. As of the latest COVID data, the state has reported over 24,400 new daily cases in the last 24 hours. More than 32,000 patients have recovered and 460 people have died from COVID-19 during this period. The state has extended restrictions barring essential services till the 7th of June. However, the Chief Minister M.K. Stalin has said the government cannot keep extending lockdown, stressing that people need to cooperate to contain the spread of the virus. The vaccination drive in the state has also hit a roadblock, with the state being compelled to halt inoculations till the 5th of June due to a shortage of vaccines. According to the state's health secretary, fresh vaccine supplies will arrive by the 6th of June. Away from COVID-19, the state has also been in focus over the stand taken at the recent GST Council meeting, where the Finance Minister P. Thiaga Rajan said that a one-state, one-vote model was fundamentally unfair. He made a case, like many other states, for representation on the council, which is proportionate to population. He also batted for zero GST on vaccines and drugs being used in the treatment of COVID. In the recently released Niti Aayog Sustainable Development Goals Index, the state has ranked second after Kerala in terms of poverty alleviation. The state ranked at the first spot with Delhi. It was also among the top states in terms of affordable and clean energy. Well, joining us now is P. Thiaga Rajan, the Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu. Mr. Thiaga Rajan, always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Before I get to you on matters related to GST and the GST Council meeting, let me start by asking you for an update on what's happening in the COVID pandemic and dealing with its spread. We have seen a decline, though you continue to see over 24,000 cases being added in the last 24 hours. I am given to understand that members of the State Medical Expert Committee have suggested that there shouldn't be a generalized lockdown across the state, that districts where we have seen a decline in active cases could look at easing up, could look at reopening to some extent. What's the way forward?
Yeah, I think a localized strategy has always been the right approach. You know, back when I was an opposition MLA in 2020, April and May, I've written extensively papers on this and appeared on TV. And I've said the whole notion of spread is local. So if you find areas where there's high density of people with high rates of infection, then those should be treated differently than other places. And of course, it's hard to implement. You know, I just remind you, it's been less than a month since we assumed office as ministers, and even less since we were sworn in as MLAs following that. So in the limited time we have tried to implement all the philosophies we talked about in opposition, which is increased transparency, connectivity of data all the way to the crematoriums, openness to the public, engagement, and trying to do localized solutions. So for example, my leader designated certain ministers for certain districts, which at that time had the highest levels. So I took, along with my fellow minister, Mr. Murthy, the commercial tax minister, responsibility for Madurai district, where we both are from. And for the 30 lakh people or so, the 10 MLA constituencies here, we have seen remarkable improvement in 2 weeks. Our daily cases are now 1/3 of what they were 2 weeks ago. Some other districts, that's not the case. So I think Chennai, Tiruvallur, which had been a peak a long time ago, have come down a lot. Places like Madurai, where we took an aggressive distributed strategy, we've been able to flatten the curve much faster. Some places that is still not the case, especially in the western parts of Tamil Nadu, is my understanding. But to tell you the truth, I focus on the job I have at hand. So I'm not looking at the statewide numbers so much.
Right. But in your assessment, if you look at a plan to reopen, and many state governments are at this point in time linking the reopening plan to districts where the positivity rate is below 5%. The central government, the MHA's guidelines are also basically linked to the occupancy of beds, oxygenated beds, as well as the positivity rate. So what is going to be the overarching strategy that will decide what you will reopen, when you will reopen, and how much you will reopen?
Yeah, I don't want to presume too much, authority or what can I say, decision-making in my hand. The Chief Minister will make that decision with the support of the medical council he has. We replicated his medical council with a broader kind of experts task force from mental health, from physical health, from epidemiology, from virology, from merchants, from logistics providers, so that we could both manage the situation as well as manage the health. So I'm okay with any of those that you said. For example, our positivity rate that at one time had gone up as high as 20% is now nearing the 5% threshold, if not already at it. our bed availability, there's no shortage of regular beds, oxygen beds, or ICU beds. I'm told in Chennai, through some colleagues of mine, that it may be up to 30-35% vacancies in the oxygen beds. So I think certainly there are places where, of course, first you should start with the bed availability. That's the most limiting variable. And then, of course, we expanded bed capacity significantly, oxygen capacity, bed capacity, ICU capacity, all of it. But then, of course, the positivity rate locally will be a big driver. I will say one thing. The biggest variable on whether or not you can control it and how quickly you can bring the peak down, in my understanding and my experience, is whether you allow the spread to go out of the cities and into the rural areas. Right? If you keep it contained in the densely populated cities, you have infrastructure, you have access to ambulances, government hospitals, treatment facilities, doctors and nurses. Once this goes to the rural areas, you have a serious problem. So in Madurai, for example, we took an aggressive strategy to go door-to-door survey in all the rural areas using 3,800 women self-help group members. And we made sure we tamped down, we kept local beds in every panchayat, in every township, in every district union. Doctors were delegated there, vaccination was done there, testing was done there. And therefore, we were able to suppress before it ever started rising in rural areas. Once it rises in rural areas, you've got a serious problem. You don't have things like oxygen beds or ICU. And so even in a highly urban state like Tamil Nadu, that is true. I suspect in less urbanized states or less developed states, that's a real problem.
Yes, that is a crucial issue that you bring up, the spread of the virus in rural areas where the infrastructure is already in short supply. But let's address the issue of vaccinations. And, you have been writing to the central government asking that the central government enhance the allocation of vaccines to the state, the central government asks Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech to up the allocation of both Covaxin as well as Covishield to the state. Now, where do things currently stand? We're given to understand that for all practical purposes, the vaccination plan has come to a halt over the next few days till your supplies are replenished. Can you confirm that for us?
Actually, it almost came to a halt, and I guess we were allocated some after the health secretary spoke yesterday. So we have not come to a halt. As of last evening, in Madurai, we have focused on vaccinations as a high priority. So the day the allocation happens, that day we want to get it done. We have 74 or 76 centers where we do vaccinations, so we can process a whole lot of people. And so we were nearing the end of our stock, and we got allocated another 17,000 last evening. So we've been aggressively vaccinating, the evening before. So we've been aggressively vaccinating. I haven't checked with the collector this evening, but I would say there's a broader issue here. The broader issue, which I've raised a couple of places, is we are not in an open market. We are not in an efficient market. We are not in a market where there are multiple buyers, multiple sellers. The powers of supply and demand will ensure kind of efficient outcomes. We are in a market that is an oligopoly. There are 2 or 3 approved vaccines in the whole world that can be bought. And it is not in any logic of markets or the economic theory to have an oligopoly of 2 or 3 manufacturers and 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 bidders all cannibalizing each other's kind of bids as states. So the market structure and the market supply-demand situation would suggest the intelligent strategy here is to have a monopsony buyer, which is the central government. And then the central government can allocate as it sees fit in terms of by population or by weighted age or whatever they see fit. And then leave it to the states to figure out how we execute an optimal execution in our, because for example, in Tamil Nadu, we can do almost equal vaccination in rural areas as urban areas. We have very good primary health centers relative to other places. We have, one doctor per every 250, 300 people, which is like 6 or 8 or 10 times better than, let's say, some other states. So, to try and micromanage or homogenize the actual vaccination execution or to require it to be on some union government website with registration is just unnecessary complexity and difficulty. But to have a market valid outcome in an oligopolist production situation, a monopsony buyer is by far the smartest way.
Yes, you believe that central procurement is the way forward and that this is a matter that is now been taken up by the Supreme Court. The central government has 2 weeks to respond to that issue in the apex court. But let me ask you about your plans to float that global tender. I believe, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, but if I'm not mistaken, the Union Finance Minister in her annual budget presentation allocated 35,000 crores for the purchase of vaccines. So I'm not sure why this has become an issue again. I thought the original plan was that they would acquire 35,000 crores worth of vaccines. Now, if you say they were buying from Serum Institute at 100 rupees or from Bharat Biotech 120 or whatever, somewhere that equates to, between 350 crore or 250 to 350 crore doses. So I don't understand what changed between the budget statement 2-3 months ago and now, that they first said, no, you go and get it in the States, and then they said, no, maybe not, no, the GST. So I'm a bit confused. Maybe I was tied up with my own MLA election. I wasn't paying attention. But I don't know how we came to hear from there, because the budget speech was very clear that she was allocating 35,000 crores to purchase vaccines. Sorry about the interruption.
Yes. No, those are the exact questions that the Supreme Court has asked of the government, and I would imagine that when the government responds, it will have to address the issue of the budgetary allocation of 35,000 crores, as you pointed out as well. But let me ask you about, this plan of a global tender, because along with 10 other states, Tamil Nadu was one of the states that floated that global tender. I believe the global tender is set to lapse tomorrow unless you decide to extend it further. But really, this is a non-starter of an idea, as you yourself pointed out. Then why go down this road at all?
Well, let me just reveal perhaps a bit of the strategy that we had. Our Chief Minister called a meeting the day of the swearing in of the Speaker on the 12th. And we had this discussion that at some level there are not natural sellers. At some other level, as I said, there's a huge supply-demand mismatch. On the other hand, we were told that there were places where the stocks were kind of excessively acquired, like in Europe. We were told that there were places where the approval process was not going as planned, or there had been halts or something like that. We were told there were potentially market inefficiencies that would allow to be open. So I was part of that meeting, and I recommended to our Chief Minister, I said, if we're going to go for a tender, let's keep it as an open tender that we can keep re-upping. It's not a one-time fixed tender for a small quantity. Let's keep a long-term global tender with different phases of execution. And let us say that whatever vaccine happens to be approved on the day of the bid, because at that time there were only 3, but we were told that others could be. So we built in enough flexibility and optionality to deal with circumstances as they may arise, and we floated the tender. And we didn't just stop at that. Many people have been trying to get direct access, including myself. You may have heard that I went through some connectivity to the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who is in constant touch with the White House, from his personal relationships, and who's working through the Rainbow Coalition and the Indian doctors, multi-ethnic doctors, and so forth. But part of our request to them was not just that we get allocation from the excess vaccines that the US was going to donate, but also to put in a word for us with the CEOs of AstraZeneca, which is really the only one that was approved, and potentially Pfizer, we heard that might be getting approved, to participate in our tender. Now, there's some really technical issues and some really complex issues why global manufacturers seem reluctant to enter into direct agreements with state governments. There's a lot of complexity to this. The government of India often acts as the counterpart even on regular transactions. For example, the government of Tamil Nadu's loans with the World Bank are not direct loans. They're World Bank to the government of India and government of India to the government of Tamil Nadu. So there's some complexities in terms of credit rating, counterparty risk, etc. I don't know what all those are. We've just come to office, as I say, less than a month ago. But with the limited information we had at the time, we thought it would be irresponsible to not at least try, not just in terms of structuring the tender properly with flexibility and optionality, but also to try and leverage our connectivity, which I have done personally, for example, both in Singapore and in the US. There's also some manufacturing units in Singapore. That's what we tried.
So will you now extend the global tender beyond tomorrow? Or, as you point out, companies like Pfizer and Moderna are on record to say that they will not deal individually with state governments. As and when they do decide to negotiate, they will deal only with the central government. So what's the point then of keeping the tender going?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, it's not my call. I'm one of the cabinet ministers. The chief minister will make the call. I will, if asked, I will give my advice to the best of my understanding from a couple of decades in the market about, transactions, trading, counterparty risk, optionality, contract terms, and so forth. But I think the point here is that Pfizer and Moderna, they're not innocents. They understand that the approval process has to go through the union government in the first place. So it's hard to think about transacting with states when you're not an approved vaccine in the first place. And I think, we are, sometimes we get confused about the cart and the horse. In my mind, the first thing the union government should do is expand the list of vaccines. When the government has chosen to take Covaxin from Bharat Biotech without phase 3 trials complete, why not approve vaccines from other manufacturers that have already gone through FDA or NHS or European or other standards?
And that's happening now. That's happening now. The policy has changed. The policy has changed. So those vaccines that have already been approved by international regulators don't have to go through clinical trials or bridge trials any longer here in India. The sticky issue now is on the issue of indemnity, which I understand is a matter being discussed. But let's move away from vaccines and talk about the future of the GST and the meetings of the GST Council, because, you had a rocky start at the GST Council, your very first meeting. Now, you've raised several issues there, from the fact that there is a gap between what was promised under the GST regime as well as what is actually realized on the ground. The benefits you believe have not accrued. You've raised questions about the future of the ownership of the GST network. You said that there was justifiable rancor on the part of states because of the trust deficit with the centre. And I would imagine at the end of what's transpired at the last meeting, it looks like things have only gotten worse.
Actually, I want to set a few things right here, if you don't mind. First of all, nobody looks for a rocky start. I didn't go there to try and make waves. I went as the first time I made the statement. I said, I'm the youngest member here by experience. I realize that many of you have greater seniority and depth. So I speak with humility as the last entrant. But sometimes the last entrant has the freshest eyes and have not been that have not been jaded by the proceedings. Therefore, please listen to me as somebody giving you a fresh perspective. That's the first point I made. Second point I made, I said, it is not as if this is, untenable issues. These were all issues that have already been there, and whatever I was going to say came to fruition immediately. The first 3 agenda items of the GST Council, one was minutes for approval, one was something else for ratification, one was something else for information. Immediately, it was not clear what the law allows just to be for information. 72 rate-setting decisions, can they be set by somebody not in this council? Is that constitutionally valid? So whatever my concerns were, those concerns were set in the right spirit. And other than the fact that one minister happened to go out and make a press conference about this, I would say I had no ill feeling, nor did I feel any second-hand treatment, or nor did anybody, including the Honorable Union Finance Minister, have any real rancor. I think all of us spoke in good faith. We may have different perspectives. I say, for example, there are some fundamental conflict of interest issues in the design. I'm happy to say that on record. There was no hidden agenda. There was no malafide intent. There was only good intent to make something that hasn't been working fantastically well, or at least universally accepted as fantastically well, to work better. The concerns that I was bringing to the table were validated immediately. And nobody felt that this was a personal attack either for me or against me, nor did I accuse anybody of anything, at least publicly, till such time as some minister went and made a press conference. At that point, I revealed the truth. I said it was never about big state, small state per se. It was about the minister from a small state attacking the good faith, the integrity of ministers asking questions about what should be for validation, or for approval, what should be for information, what should be for ratification. And those ministers represent crores and crores of people. How does it behoove a minister to cast aspersions on the integrity or good faith of large state ministers? That's the only reason I use the words, right? Nobody goes to these meetings looking to cause trouble. We're all responsible people. We represent, the hundreds of thousands or lakhs or crores of people. We're not looking to go get into some, disruptive debate. Who does it help? Right? We're civilized people. We want good outcomes, not grandstanding.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to address that issue, because as you point out, no one wants disruption. And as you point out, no one believes in grandstanding. So what's the way forward? On the immediate issue of GST on COVID-related vaccines and drugs, it looks like, there is going to be a decision to keep the 5% rate going as opposed to zero rated, which is what states like you and West Bengal and others had suggested. Now, GOM will decide and give its recommendations shortly. There is also a separate GOM that the finance minister has spoken of to address the issue that you had brought up along with other states, and that is the issue of extending the compensation beyond the 1st of July 2022. So given the fact that this is an important issue, no one is talking about a reversal of the GST regime. What should the approach now be to ensure that there is less disruption and more conducive meetings going forward?
No, listen, I think, again, you're getting a bit confused. Please allow me 2 minutes. I just want to clarify a few things. There is a GOM for the 0% versus 5%. I think there's serious flaws with that. I'm going to address them in a minute. There is no GOM, to my knowledge, about the compensation. The whole council is going to talk and meet about it. That's what the Honorable Union Minister promised us, a separate meeting of the entire council for nothing but compensation extension. And I take her at good faith. I have no reason not to. So there is no GOM to that. There are other GOMs that were announced, including, for example, one on gaming and horse racing and lotteries and all that, in which, again, the Honorable Union Finance Minister has very graciously given me a seat on that, because my state has certain amount of racing and so forth. So I am not at any point accusing anybody of malafide intent. But now I come to a practical problem. It is beyond any rationale that we should be discussing whether to keep GST on vaccines and life-saving drugs at 5% or 0%. It should have been a no-brainer discussion, 0% done, let's go. At first, it was argued that it's not viable. Then many people pointed to the law that it was viable. Once it was made viable, it is ironic. The biggest states who are stand to lose the greatest GST, we said, let's do it, it's humanitarian. The kind of bigger states, I don't want to name them, but have a reason to be aligned with the center because of commonality of party in power, were hedging their bets that let's do the right thing. Maybe they didn't want to kind of upset the board. And then all these small states that their entire budgets, 90, 85, 95% of their budgets depend on central grants and schemes, they were saying, no, let's not go to zero, let us keep the revenue coming. Now here you have an inherent conflict of interest. This is what we used to call in the trading flow, talking your own book. I'm long something, so I talk it up. Or I'm short something, so I talk it down. So they are talking inherently. I'm not accusing them of anything. I'm saying openly the mathematical model is that those who depend on this revenue are now saying we should not be compassionate. So you have an inherent conflict of interest. So in that case, I pointed out that this is maybe not the best design because, and many people, including, for example, from Karnataka, from Uttar Pradesh, from Gujarat, big states, and many of them net GST payers and net taxpayers, also felt that we should get closer to 0%. But you see, this is where I have an issue that the design is not conducive. This should not have been a discussion. And I pointed out one more thing. I said, we're having these discussions in abstract, in theory. The GST network is the monopoly owner of all data across all things. And this plus there were two other really important agenda items where data would have helped a lot. I said, surely when we are taking up such a discussion, should we go from 5% to 0% for a limited period of 1 to 3 months for goods that are not available anyway? It's not as if I can buy 2 lakh crores worth of these things. Even if I wanted to, there's no buyer. I mean, there's no seller, there's no supply. So What is the actual mathematical cost? Is it that we're only going to end up spending 20,000 crores on these kinds of things, and though 5% of that is whatever, 1,000 crores? Is it only 10,000 crores and it's 5? So let us quantify the problem rather than argue in principle, on theory, on zero, not zero, valid.
Right.
Everybody says it's doable. Now, what is the size of the consequence? If it is a 500 crore or 1,000 crore drop in the overall tax revenues, surely on humanitarian grounds, we should all say, let's do it and move on. But we don't have the data. We should have the data. The GSTN should be able to tell us. Why don't we have these kinds of data support to make decisions, was my question.
Well, we'll see what decision the GOM takes. And you're right, my apologies, the Finance Minister spoke of a GST Council meeting, a special GST Council meeting, not a GOM, to discuss the extension of the compensation. But let me end by asking you, Mr. Thiaga Rajan, when do we see a full budget being presented by you for the state of Tamil Nadu?
Well, the Chief Minister will make the decision, and I like his direction. But right now, my instinct and my recommendation to the Chief Minister was that till we have greater clarity, the interim budget was presented, hurriedly in terms of the fiscal year and the call for the elections, which would have frozen the Common Code of Conduct. So I said, now that we have gotten into a second wave that is 3x, 5x, 7x, the magnitude and severity of the first wave, it would behoove us to wait. Now, the interim budget already made arrangements for the basic salaries and pensions and all that till September, October. And as a benchmark, when Ms. Jayalalitha came back to power in 16 after running 11 to 16, she only presented the interim budget at the end of July, and the demand for grants went into August and September. So my recommendation to the Chief Minister was that let us wait to see the impact on the economy. Let us look at our tax collections. Let us look at how the union government is sending us funds, when they're settling their dues. Let us look at the total medical costs and the incremental costs we've had. And then we'll go. So, no earlier than end of July, which is the Ms. Jayalalitha benchmark, is my recommendation or request to the Chief Minister. He'll make a decision as he sees fit.
Okay. All right, so no earlier than the end of July, perhaps that is the timeline as far as the full budget that you will present. Thanks very much for joining us here. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Appreciate your time.